My parents refused to attend my wedding because my sister was too fragile from a breakup. I cut them off, but when they crawled back demanding I fund their retirement and her lifestyle, I triggered a financial trap that cost them everything. This is where the story truly begins, and the betrayal cuts deeper than you can imagine. Make sure you're subscribed to see how I finally stood up for myself. We're always curious. Where in the world are you all watching from today? Let us know in the comments. The silence in the bridal suite was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, suffocating silence of a room holding its breath before a scream. I sat on the velvet ottoman, the layers of my ivory tulle gown cascading around me like a cloud, but inside I felt heavy as lead. My phone was in my hand. My grip was so tight my knuckles had turned white, matching the dress. Gabriel, my fiancé, my husband in less than an hour, was kneeling in front of me. He wasn't looking at the dress, or the flowers, or the clock. He was looking at my face, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of fury and heartbreak that mirrored my own. "Read it to me one more time, Caroline," he said softly. His voice was steady, the anchor I desperately needed in the storm that had just broken over my head. I swallowed, my throat clicking dryly. I looked down at the screen, the blue light harsh against my tear-stained makeup. The text message was from my mother, Mila. It had arrived 3 minutes ago, 3 minutes that had effectively shattered the happiest day of my life. I cleared my throat, forcing the words out past the lump that felt like broken glass. "Caroline, we are not coming. Jade is in a very dark place this morning. She saw a photo of her ex with someone else on Instagram, and she is inconsolable. We cannot leave her alone in this state. It would be cruel to celebrate while she is suffering. We hope you understand. Have a nice ceremony." Mom. "Have a nice ceremony," Gabriel repeated, the words tasting like ash in the air. He stood up and walked to the window, running a hand through his hair. "She's not sick. She's not in the hospital. She saw a photo on Instagram." "She's inconsolable," I whispered, the old, familiar conditioning kicking in even now. "If they leave her, she might do something." Gabriel spun around. "She won't do anything, Caroline. She does this every single time something is about you. Every birthday, every graduation, and now our wedding. It is a manipulation tactic. It is a game. And your parents, Mila and Benjamin, are the willing players." I looked at my reflection in the ornate mirror across the room. I looked like a bride. I had the dress, the veil, the professionally done hair. But the eyes staring back at me were the eyes of a frightened little girl who had just realized, finally and fatally, that she didn't matter. My sister, Jade, was 26 years old. She was not a child. But to my parents, she was a porcelain doll constantly on the verge of shattering, requiring all their hands to hold her together. I was just the shelf they expected to stand sturdy in the corner, gathering dust. "They aren't coming," I said, the reality finally settling into my bones like a deep freeze. "My father isn't walking me down the aisle. My mother isn't going to help me with my veil. They are at home, probably making Jade hot chocolate and telling her how brave she is for surviving an Instagram post." The pain wasn't sharp. It was a dull, hollow ache that seemed to scoop out my insides. I had done everything right. I had a stable career as a senior graphic designer. I had found a wonderful man, a successful architect who loved me. I had planned this wedding for 18 months, careful to accommodate everyone's schedule, everyone's needs. And in one text message, sent with the casual disregard of canceling a lunch date, they had told me exactly where I ranked. Gabriel returned to me, taking my hands in his. "We can delay," he offered, though I knew he didn't want to. "We can tell the guests there's an emergency." I looked up at him. I thought about the 150 people waiting in the sanctuary. Friends, colleagues, his supportive family who had flown in from across the country. I thought about the thousands of dollars we had spent. Then I thought about Jade. I could picture her perfectly, curled up on my parents' expensive beige sectional, sobbing theatrically while Mila rubbed her back and Benjamin paced the room, cursing the man who dared to date someone else. They were a closed ecosystem of dysfunction, feeding off each other's drama. If I delayed the wedding, Jade won. If I cried and begged them to come, Jade won. Something snapped inside me. It was a quiet snap, like a dry twig breaking in a winter forest, but it severed the cord that had tethered me to their approval for 29 years. "No," I said. My voice was stronger this time. I stood up, the dress rustling around. "Demi, we are not delaying anything. We are going to go out there, and we are going to get married." "And your parents?" Gabriel asked, searching my eyes. "My parents made their choice," I said, turning to the mirror to fix a smudge of mascara beneath my eye. "They chose to be caretakers for a 26-year-old toddler instead of parents to their daughter. That was their decision." I turned back to him, and for the first time that day, I smiled. It wasn't a happy smile, but it was a fierce one. "But they forgot one thing, Gabriel," I said, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. "They forgot who handles their paperwork. They forgot who set up their retirement accounts. And they definitely forgot that I have the passwords to everything." The betrayal was worse than the diagnosis of a terminal illness, because it was voluntary. But as I adjusted my veil, I knew one thing for sure. The Caroline who begged for scraps of affection died in this room. The woman walking down the aisle was someone entirely new. The wedding was beautiful, in the way a funeral can be beautiful. To the guests, it looked perfect. The flowers were lush, the music was swelling, and the vows Gabriel and I exchanged were raw and honest. But every time I looked at the empty pew in the front row, the one reserved for mother of the bride and father of the bride, I felt a phantom limb pain. Gabriel's mother, a saint of a woman named Sarah, had tried to fill the gap. She squeezed my hand too tight during the photos. She danced with me when the father-daughter song was supposed to happen, turning an awkward moment into something sweet. But the absence of Mila and Benjamin was a black hole, sucking the light out of the room for me. In the weeks that followed, the silence from my family was deafening. I didn't call them. For the first time in my life, I didn't chase them. Usually, after a Jade crisis, I would be the one to call, to apologize for being insensitive, to ask how Jade was doing, to smooth things over so we could pretend to be a normal family again. Not this time. We went on our honeymoon to Italy. We ate gelato in Rome and drank wine in Tuscany. I posted photos, gorgeous, happy photos of me and Gabriel living our best lives. I checked the view counts on my stories. Jade viewed, Mila viewed, Benjamin viewed. They were watching, they were seeing me happy without them, and I knew it was eating them alive. But they didn't reach out. "No, congratulations." "No, we're sorry we missed it." "No, let's talk." Instead, I heard through the grapevine, my cousin who still spoke to them, that the narrative had already been spun. "They're telling people you uninvited them." My cousin texted me one afternoon while I was back at work, designing a layout for a tech magazine. "They said you became a bridezilla and demanded Jade not be there because she was sad, and they couldn't choose between their daughters, so they stayed home in protest." I stared at the text, my coffee cup hovering halfway to my mouth. The audacity was breathtaking. It was a masterpiece of revisionist history. "Let them talk," I texted back. "I'm done." But I wasn't just done emotionally. I was done logistically. That evening, I sat in our home office. Gabriel was in the living room reviewing blueprints for a new commercial complex. I opened my laptop and navigated to a secure folder labeled Parents Admin. For the last 5 years, since Benjamin's eyes started failing him and Mila decided math gave her anxiety, I had managed their entire digital life. I paid their mortgage online. I managed their car payments. I filed their taxes. I balanced their checkbooks. I had the logins for their bank accounts, their investment portfolios, and their email. I logged into their primary checking account. The balance was lower than I expected, significantly lower. I frowned, clicking through the transaction history. Sephora, $450. Lululemon, $300. Ticketmaster, $800. Venmo to JadeStar88, $1,200. Venmo to JadeStar88, $2,500. Oh, Mila, I whispered to the empty room. What are you doing? They were bleeding money. My father, Benjamin, had retired 2 years ago with a decent nest egg, but it wasn't infinite. My mother had never worked. They lived in a house that was too big for them, drove cars they leased to look wealthy, and apparently were bankrolling Jade's life as a lifestyle influencer who didn't actually influence anyone. I clicked over to their credit card statements, maxed out. I checked the home equity line of credit, drawn down by 80%. My heart hammered against my ribs. They weren't just irresponsible, they were on the precipice of ruin. And they had no idea because I was the one who usually moved money around, set up payment plans, and warned them when to slow down. I hovered my mouse over the auto-pay settings for their mortgage and utilities. For years, I had kept the ship afloat. I had made sure the lights stayed on while they fawned over Jade. I had ensured their credit scores remained pristine so they could lease a new Lexus for Jade to crash. Click. I disabled the autopay for the electric bill. Click. I disabled the autopay for the water. Click. I removed my email address from the alerts section. I didn't steal a dime. I didn't change their passwords. I didn't lock them out. I simply resigned. I stopped being the invisible engine that kept their life running smoothly. If they wanted to focus entirely on Jade, they could handle the administrative reality of their lives, too. Everything okay? Gabriel asked, leaning against the doorframe. He held 2 mugs of tea. I closed the laptop with a definitive snap. Better than okay, I said, taking the tea. I just handed in my resignation. Work? He asked, confused. No, I smiled, sipping the chamomile. Family management. I'm officially retired. I knew what was coming. They were burning through cash at an unsustainable rate to soothe Jade's feelings. Eventually, the money would run out. And when it did, they wouldn't call a financial advisor. They wouldn't call a debt consolidator. They would call me. But they had forgotten one crucial thing. I knew exactly how much the house was worth, and I knew exactly who really owned the land it sat on. 3 months of silence, that was how long the peace lasted. In those 3 months, I flourished. My skin cleared up. I got a promotion at work. Gabriel and I hosted dinner parties where no one cried, no one made a scene, and no one demanded to be the center of attention. It was blissful. I realized during this time just how much energy I had spent mitigating my family's chaos. I had been a peacekeeper in a war I didn't start. To understand why this hurt so much, you have to understand the history. I wasn't just the older sister, I was the third parent. When Jade was 10 and got caught stealing lipstick, I was the one who returned it and apologized to the store manager because Mila was too embarrassed. When Jade was 18 and totaled her first car, I drove her to school for 6 months while Benjamin complained about insurance rates. I had spent my life laying myself down as a bridge for them to walk over, just so they wouldn't get their feet wet. And when it came time for my wedding, my one day, they set the bridge on fire. The call came on a Tuesday night in November. I saw the name Mom flash on my phone screen. My stomach dropped, that old conditioned reflex of fear. Gabriel paused the movie we were watching. You don't have to answer that. If I don't, I said, staring at the screen, they'll just show up at the door. I need to set the boundary. I picked up, hello, Mila. Not Mom, Mila. There was a pause on the other end. She noticed. Caroline, is that how you speak to your mother? Her voice was shrill, tight with that specific tone she used when she wanted something, but wanted to act like she was doing you a favor by asking. I'm busy, Mila. What do you need? We need to talk. It's about your sister. I almost laughed. Of course it was. I don't have a sister, I said coldly. My sister couldn't be bothered to show up to my wedding, neither could my parents. Oh, stop being so dramatic, Mila snapped. You know how sensitive Jade is. She was suicidal, Caroline, suicidal. We saved her life that day, and all you care about is your party. The lie was so blatant it took my breath away. Jade wasn't suicidal, she was manipulative. "What do you want?" I repeated, cutting through the fog. "We need to come over for dinner. Tomorrow," Mila demanded. "Bring Benjamin, we have a situation, a family situation. And since you're doing so well with your fancy architect husband, we think it's time you stepped up." "Stepped up?" I asked, my voice rising. "Jade is in trouble," Mila lowered her voice, sounding conspiratorial. "Real trouble this time. It's not her fault, obviously. The world is just against that poor girl, but she needs help, financial help, and since we've supported you all these years." My grip on the phone tightened. Supported me? I had paid for my own college. I had paid for my own car. I had paid for my own wedding. "We'll be there at 7:00, Mila said, assuming my compliance as she always did. "And Caroline, try to make something nice. Jade has been very stressed, she needs comfort food." She hung up. I sat there, the phone warm in my hand. "Let me guess," Gabriel said, his face darkening. "They want money." "They want money," I confirmed, "and they want to pretend the wedding never happened." "So we tell them to go to hell," Gabriel said firmly. "No," I said, a cold plan forming in my mind. I remembered the bank accounts I had looked at. I remembered the negative balances, the excessive spending, the impending crash. I stood up and walked to the window. "We invite them over, we let them talk, we let them dig the hole." "Why?" "Because," I turned to him, "I need to know. Exactly how deep in the hole they are before I bury them." The next evening, they arrived. Jade looked expensive. She was wearing a new designer coat, her hair was freshly balayaged, and she was carrying a handbag that cost more than my first car. But her eyes were darting around the room, nervous, predatory. Mila walked in like she owned the place, critiquing my curtains immediately. "A bit drab, isn't it? Very gray." Benjamin, my father, looked older, tired. He shuffled in, avoiding my eyes, looking at the floor. He carried the weight of a man who knew he was drowning but was too proud to ask for a life vest. They sat on my sofa, the sofa they hadn't seen in 6 months, and didn't ask how I was. They didn't ask about the wedding. They didn't ask about Gabriel. Mila clasped her hands together. "So, here is the reality. Jade has an opportunity, a business opportunity. She wants to start her own brand. Influencer management. It's the future, Caroline, but the banks, they don't understand vision." "They denied the loan," I translated. "They were rude," Jade spat, her voice whiny and entitled. "They asked for tax returns. They asked for collateral. It's ridiculous." "We need $50,000, Mila said, dropping the number like she was asking for salt. "To get her started. We would give it to her, of course, but our liquidity is tied up in investments right now." "Tied up," I repeated flatly. I knew for a fact their liquidity was tied up in Sephora and Ticketmaster. "It's a loan," Benjamin mumbled, finally speaking. "We'll co-sign, but we need you to front the cash. You and Gabriel, you have the savings." "And if you don't," Jade added, inspecting her manicured nails, "it just proves you don't care about anyone but yourself. Just like the wedding." The room went silent. She had brought it up. She had used the wedding, the event she ruined, as a weapon to guilt me into giving her $50,000. I looked at Gabriel. He was white-knuckling his wine glass. I looked at my parents. They were looking at me with that familiar expectation. "Fix it, Caroline, be the good daughter, clean up the mess." But they didn't know I had seen the ledger. They didn't know I knew about the lien on their house. And they certainly didn't know that the investments they claimed to have were gone. $50,000, I said slowly. "That's a lot of money." "It's family," Mila said, her voice hardening. "And after the way you treated us, excluding us from your life, you owe us this." I smiled. It was the smile of a wolf who had just trapped a rabbit. "Okay," I said. "I'll consider it, but I need to see the business plan. And I need to see your financials, Dad, just to make sure the co-signing is valid." Benjamin paled, Mila stiffened. "That's not necessary," Mila said quickly. "We are your parents, you trust us." Of course, I lied. But Gabriel is an architect. He's all about structure. If we do this, we do it on paper. I wasn't going to give them a dime. But I was going to use this due diligence to expose every single lie they had told for the last decade. The morning after the dinner, the air in our house felt cleaner, but charged with static electricity. Gabriel was in the kitchen making coffee, the grinder whirring loudly, mirroring the gears turning in my head. "You're not actually considering giving them the money, are you?" he asked as I walked in, handing me a steaming mug. "Not a cent," I said, leaning against the counter. "But I need the proof. If I just say no, they'll tell everyone I'm stingy, that I'm punishing Jade, that I'm a horrible sister. They'll play the victim card until the end of time. I need to dismantle the victimhood." I took a sip of coffee. I need to show them that I know they aren't invested, they're broke. I didn't wait for them to send the documents. I knew they wouldn't. Benjamin would stall, claiming the scanner was broken or he couldn't find the files. So, I took the day off work. I started my investigation not as a daughter, but as a forensic accountant of my own trauma. I drove to the county clerk's office first. It's public record, but people forget that. "I'm looking up a property deed," I told the clerk, giving my parents' address. 10 minutes later, I was holding a document that made my blood run cold. They hadn't just refinanced the house. They had taken out a second mortgage 3 years ago. And 6 months ago, right around the time Jade went on a month-long trip to Bali to find herself, they had taken out a high-interest private loan secured against the property. The house, my childhood home, had almost zero equity left. If they missed payments, it wouldn't just be a foreclosure, it would be a financial crater. Next, I went to the bank where my grandmother had set up a small trust for me and Jade. It wasn't huge money, but it was supposed to be for emergencies. I hadn't touched mine. "I'd like to check the status of the account." "TS for Caroline and Jade Miller," I told the banker, presenting my ID. The banker clicked away for a moment, then frowned. "Ma'am, the account ending in 4421 yours is intact, but the account ending in 4422, that was closed out 14 months ago." "Closed out?" "Yes, withdrawn in full by the trustee, Benjamin Miller." My father had drained Jade's safety net, or maybe Jade had drained it herself with his help. Either way, the money was gone. I sat in my car in the bank parking lot, the documents spread out on the passenger seat. The puzzle pieces were clicking together into a picture of absolute negligence. They weren't just supporting Jade, they were cannibalizing their own future to do it. And now that they had eaten everything on their plate, they were coming for mine. My phone buzzed, a text from Mila. "Jade is so excited, she's already looking at office space. When can we pick up the check?" The delusion was impenetrable. I needed one more piece of leverage. I needed to know exactly where that money went. I knew my father used a specific accountant for years, Mr. Henderson, an old family friend. He retired last year, but I knew where he lived. I drove to his house. He was gardening out front, a sweet old man who had known me since I was in diapers. "Caroline," he beamed, wiping dirt from his hands. "I haven't seen you since the wedding." "Oh, wait, I heard about that. I'm so sorry." "It's okay, Mr. Henderson," I said gently. "Actually, I'm here about my parents. They're asking me for a loan, and I'm worried." His smile faded. He looked around nervously. "Caroline, you're a smart girl. You handle numbers, don't do it." "Why?" "I stopped working for your father not because I retired," he said, lowering his voice, "but because I couldn't ethically sign off on his returns anymore." He was claiming expenses for Jade, business expenses, for a business that doesn't exist. Trips, clothes, cars. It's fraud, Caroline, if the IRS looks too closely. He trailed off, but he didn't have to finish. I had them. I had the mortgage documents proving they were broke. I had the bank records showing they drained the trust. And now, I had witnessed testimony of tax fraud. I wasn't just the daughter anymore. I was the prosecutor. I texted back 2 hours later. "Come over tonight, we can finalize everything." They arrived at 6:30 p.m., 30 minutes early. Greed does that to people, it makes them punctual. Jade was practically vibrating with excitement. She walked in carrying a bottle of cheap champagne. "To new beginnings," she squealed, popping the cork before I even offered them a glass. "My brand is going to be huge, Caroline. I'm thinking of hiring an assistant immediately." "Let's sit down," I said, gesturing to the dining table. Gabriel stood behind me, his hand resting on the back of my chair. A silent sentinel. Mila sat down, looking around expectantly. "So, do you have the transfer ready, or a check? A check is fine." "I have some paperwork first," I said, placing a thick manila folder on the table. "Oh, for God's sake," Benjamin sighed, rolling his eyes. "Always with the bureaucracy. Just give your sister the money, Caroline. Stop being so controlling." "It's not bureaucracy, Dad," I said, opening the folder. "It's reality." I slid the first paper across the table. The deed to their house, with the liens highlighted in neon yellow. "What is this?" Benjamin squinted at it, his face losing color instantly. "That shows that you own about 4% of your house," I said calmly. "You took out a private loan at 12% interest 6 months ago. Why?" That's private financial business," Mila snapped, trying to snatch the paper. "How dare you snoop?" "I didn't snoop, it's public record," I said. "And here is the record from the bank. Jade's trust fund. Gone, $25,000 withdrawn last year." Jade stopped drinking her champagne. She looked at Benjamin. "You told me that was an early inheritance bonus. You said you had plenty more." "Shut up, Jade," Benjamin hissed. "So," I continued, my voice steady, though my heart was pounding against my ribs. "You have no equity, you have no savings. You drained Jade's trust. And Mr. Henderson told me today that he fired you as a client because you were falsifying tax returns to cover Jade's lifestyle." The silence in the room was absolute. You could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Mila stood up, her face twisting into an ugly sneer. "Who do you think you are? You ungrateful little brat. We raised you, we fed you, and this is how you repay us, by digging up dirt." "I'm not repaying you," I said, standing up to meet her eye to eye. "I'm protecting myself. You wanted $50,000. You don't have $50,000. If I gave you that money, it wouldn't go to a business. It would go to pay off that loan shark you borrowed from, wouldn't it?" Benjamin looked away. That was the confirmation. "You're lying," Jade screamed, throwing her hands up. "You're just jealous. You've always been jealous of me because I'm creative and fun, and you're just a boring corporate drone. Mom, tell her she's lying." "She is lying," Mila declared, grabbing her purse. "She's trying to sabotage you, Jade. She can't stand to see you succeed. Come on, we're leaving." "If you leave," I said, my voice cutting through the noise like a blade, "I'm calling the IRS." Mila froze. "I'm not joking," I said. "Mr. Henderson is very worried about his own liability. If you walk out that door and keep slandering me, keep telling people I'm the bad guy, I will hand this entire folder over to an auditor." "You wouldn't," Benjamin whispered. "We're your parents." "You stopped being my parents the day you chose an Instagram post over my wedding," I said. "Now, sit down." They sat, but they weren't defeated yet. They were cornered animals, and cornered animals bite. "Fine," Benjamin said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "We're in a bit of a tight spot. The market, the economy." "The spending," I corrected. "It's the spending." "So help us," Mila cried, switching tactics from aggression to martyrdom instantly. "If you know we're in trouble, how can you just sit there? We could lose the house. Jade could be on the street." "Jade is 26, Gabriel spoke up for the first time. His voice was deep and rumbling. "She can get a job." "A job?" Jade looked at him like he had suggested she eat a live rat. "I am a content creator. I can't work at a Starbucks. It would ruin my brand." "Your brand is unemployed mooch," Gabriel said dryly. "Here is the deal," I said, sliding a contract across the table. I had drafted it that afternoon with a lawyer friend. "I will not give you $50,000. However, I will pay off the private loan, the high-interest one, directly to the lender, if. I paused, letting the word hang in the air. If what? Mila asked, eyes narrowing. If you sign over the power of attorney for your finances to a third-party fiduciary. Not me, a professional. Someone who will put you on a budget. No more allowances for Jade, no more luxury cars. You live on your pension, and that's it. And Jade? Benjamin asked weakly. Jade gets nothing, I said. Jade gets a job application. I won't do it, Jade shrieked. You're trying to control my life. Mom, don't let her do this. Mila looked at the contract, then at Jade, then at me. I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. She wanted the money, but she didn't want the rules. We need time to think, Mila said stiffly. You have 24 hours, I said. After that, the offer is off the table, and the IRS tip is back on it. They left in a huff, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. For the next day, my phone blew up, not from them, but from extended family. Aunt Lisa, Cousin Mike, even my grandmother. How could you blackmail your parents? Jade says you're trying to steal the house. Your mother is crying, saying you're evicting them. They had spun the narrative again. They told everyone I was forcing them to sign over their home to me, that I was a predator taking advantage of their temporary cash flow issue. I realized then that a private confrontation wasn't enough. They were immune to logic because they lived in a fantasy world supported by the validation of others. As long as they could lie to the extended family and get sympathy, they would never change. I needed to break the echo chamber. The Golden Jubilee, my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary party, was that weekend. The whole family would be there, 50 people. I knew my parents would use it as a stage. They would cry to Aunt Lisa, they would villainize me to Uncle Bob. They would try to turn the entire clan against me to pressure me into giving them the money without the conditions. I looked at the folder of evidence on my desk. Are you sure about this? Gabriel asked, watching me pack the papers into my bag on Saturday morning. They're going to ambush me there, I said. They're going to try to shame me into submission in front of Grandma. I zipped the bag shut. I'm just bringing my own ammunition. The venue for the Golden Jubilee was a rented banquet hall at the local country club. It was draped in gold streamers and filled with the scent of roast beef and old perfume. When Gabriel and I walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Conversations paused. Heads turned. My mother, Mila, was holding court at the center table, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while Aunt Lisa patted her arm. Jade was next to her, looking tragically beautiful in black, as if she were mourning the death of her bank account. We made our way to my grandparents to wish them a happy anniversary. My grandfather hugged me stiffly. My grandmother looked worried. Caroline, she whispered, your mother says, she says you're threatening them. I'm not Grandma, I said, kissing her cheek. I'm TR. Ying to help them, they just don't like the medicine. We sat at a table in the back, exiled. The speeches began. Uncle Bob told a joke. Aunt Lisa gave a toast. Then my father stood up. He looked haggard, but he had a microphone, and a man with a microphone and a victim complex is a dangerous thing. I want to thank everyone for being here, Benjamin said, his voice trembling slightly. It means the world to us. Family is everything, or it should be. He looked directly at me. The room followed his gaze. It breaks my heart, he continued, gaining momentum, that in our golden years, when we should be resting, we are fighting for our survival. And not against the bank or the government, but against our own flesh and blood. Murmurs rippled through the room. We asked for help, Benjamin said, a tear actually rolling down his cheek. A small loan to help Jade start a business, to help us keep our home, and my daughter, Caroline, she demanded we sign over our house to her. She threatened to call the police on us if we didn't comply. Shameful, someone whispered loudly. She has abandoned the values we taught her, he finished, pointing a shaking finger at me. She has chosen money over family. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might crack a rib. Gabriel started to stand up, his face thunderous, but I put a hand on his arm. "No," I whispered, "me." I stood up. I didn't have a microphone, but I had the teacher voice I used when leading design workshops. I projected. "That's a very interesting story, Dad," I said, my voice ringing clear across the banquet hall. "But you forgot to mention a few details." "Sit down, Caroline," Mila shrieked from her table. "Don't ruin this party." "You already ruined it," I said, walking toward the center of the room. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder. "You told everyone I want to steal your house? Here is the deed." I held it up. "You already mortgaged 96% of the house, Dad. You don't own it. The bank does. And the private lender you borrowed from at 12% interest owns the rest." "Lies," Jade yelled. "She forged that." "And this," I pulled out the next paper, "is the trust fund statement. Grandma, you set up that trust for Jade, didn't you? For her future." My grandmother nodded, eyes wide. "Benjamin withdrew it all," I said, turning to show the paper to the room. $25,000. Gone. Spent on trips to Cabo, designer bags, and leasing a BMW for Jade. That was for investment," Benjamin stammered, the microphone amplifying his panic. "And finally," I said, pulling out the affidavit I had Mr. Henderson sign, a simple statement that he had resigned due to ethical concerns. "Mr. Henderson, who is sitting right there at table 4, can confirm that he fired you as a client because you were committing tax fraud to hide Jade's spending." Every head in the room swiveled to poor Mr. Henderson. He looked terrified, but he slowly nodded. "It's true, Ben," he said softly. "I couldn't do it anymore." The silence now was heavy, crushing. It wasn't the silence of awkwardness. It was the silence of truth landing like a bomb. I walked over to my parents' table and placed the folder in front of my mother. "I didn't ask for your house," I said, my voice dropping to a normal, deadly calm volume. "I offered to pay off your debt if you agreed to stop enabling Jade and see a financial planner. I offered to save you, but you wanted the money without the accountability." I looked at Jade. She was shrinking in her chair, looking for the first time like a child who realized the game was over. "I'm done," I said. "I am not your bank. I am not your retirement plan. And I am certainly not the villain of this story anymore." I turned to my grandparents. "I love you both. Happy anniversary. Gabriel and I will be leaving now." We walked out. Nobody stopped us. Nobody said a word. The only sound was the hum of the air conditioning and the shattering of a lifetime of lies. The fallout was nuclear, but swift. With the truth exposed to the entire extended family, my parents' support system evaporated overnight. Aunt Lisa, who had been their biggest defender, was furious when she realized they had borrowed money from her 2 years ago under false pretenses as well. My grandmother was heartbroken, but she was a pragmatist. She cut off the small monthly allowance she had been giving them, funneling it instead directly into a secured account that they couldn't touch, solely for utility bills. Without the enabling cash flow, the house of cards collapsed. 3 months after the party, my parents sold the house. They didn't make a profit. The sale just barely covered the mortgages and the loans. They moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less expensive part of town. It was decent, clean, and entirely average. Jade had the hardest landing. With no trust fund, no allowance from Mom and Dad, and no investment, money coming from me, she had to face reality. She crashed on friends' couches for a while, burning bridges as she went. Last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a dental office. It wasn't glamorous, and she wasn't an influencer, but she was paying her own rent. As for me, I didn't speak to them for a year. I needed that time to detox, to separate my identity from their dysfunction. But eventually, the silence softened. I met my father for coffee last week. He looked different. He was driving a 10-year-old Honda. He wasn't wearing his expensive watch. He looked humble. "We're managing," he said, staring into his cup. "It's quiet. The apartment is small, but it's easy to clean." "And Jade?" I asked. She visits on Sundays, he said. She complains about her boss, but she's working, it's good for her. He looked up at me then, his eyes watery. I'm sorry, Caroline, about the wedding, about everything. I looked at him. I realized I didn't need his apology to be whole. I had already healed myself by walking away. I know, Dad, I said. I accept your apology. I didn't say everything was back to normal. I didn't say we could have Sunday dinners every week. The trust was gone, and it would take years to rebuild if it ever could be fully rebuilt. But as I walked back to my car, where Gabriel was waiting for me with a smile, I felt lighter than air. I had broken the cycle. I had protected my future. And for the first time in my life, I was the protagonist of my own story.